My name is Sandra Timko, and welcome to Lumen Christi. Romans 9, verses 20 through 21 so beautifully states, "But who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for menial use?" Boy, that's direct, isn't it? Who are we to talk back to God anyway? Who are we to ever question what is perfect in His eyes? And is there ever really any menial task when it comes to serving in the kingdom? In the body, we all work together for the propagating of the kingdom. We all work to overcome obstacles as a church body. And because there is strength in numbers, this becomes a much easier task than to try to overcome obstacles on our own. We have with us today Larry Patton, who celebrates the obstacles in his life. With the grace of God, he successfully has turned those roadblocks into mere hurdles and overcome them one at a time. I would like to read from you his bio. Larry has hurdled many obstacles throughout his life. Larry has been afflicted with cerebral palsy since birth, which has affected his physical capabilities. Rather than allow his handicap to control him, Larry has faced life with a lot of courage and motivation. Larry accepted Christ at the age of 14 and has had a deep relationship with the Lord ever since. He was born in Madison, Indiana in 1956 and was raised in Berkeley, Michigan. As a teenager, he earned the God and Country Award in the Boy Scouts of America. He graduated from Wayne State University, where he received a BS in computer science. Larry was a recipient of the JC's Outstanding Young Man Award in 1980. He currently lives in Royal Oak, Michigan, where he and his wife Jennifer and their 7-year-old son William own their own home. He is currently a new member in Faith Lutheran Church in Troy, Michigan. And I'd like you now to meet my new friend and brother in the Lord, Larry Patton. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Cindy.
I'm so glad you came. I have so many questions, but I'd like to start from the beginning.
Okay.
Your mother and father were very optimistic, supportive parents,
Right.
and you had a younger brother.
Right.
And I asked you earlier if, as a child, there was sibling rivalry between you and your brother.
Right.
And you said that you, as a child, as you were achieving and accomplishing, got a lot of praise, and your brother didn't.
Right.
But that was the norm for you, so you didn't know.
Indifferent.
Right. Was he angry about that? As time progressed, did you get the opportunity to share about how that affected your relationship?
No, but my mom prayed for years that when we got to be adults that we would still be friends. And I'm here today to tell you that my brother and I are best friends, and our wives are like sisters, and I think God really answered that prayer that we are now best friends.
I wanted to talk about the teen years. Now, you came to know Christ at 14.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, I had my parents had become Christians a few years before that, and they were beginning to share how it impacted their lives. And at a youth retreat on Sunday morning, the youth director shared about how her father had come to know Christ and shared his testimony. And when she was done, she gave us the opportunity that Sunday morning to give our lives to Christ. And that was the beginning of my new birth, was on that Sunday morning in that youth retreat.
Okay, I found it really interesting prior to taping
Right.
that you mentioned that before you made Jesus Lord of your life at 14, that you weren't necessarily angry about your disability. But after you accepted Him, this new anger welled up in you. Explain why.
Well, I think two reasons. First, I didn't grow up in evangelical church. I grew up in a mainline Presbyterian church. And once I accepted Christ, it was like, okay, I thought that was it. I didn't know there was a growing, continual growth. And so for several years, I was, when I say excited about being a Christian, but really didn't have any direction. And then becoming a teenager and dating and love, and I think up to that point, it was more the neighborhood gang. And then about 15, 16, my brother started to date, my friends started to date, but there was nobody for Larry to hang out with that was special. And I can remember when I had to get a date, I would start 4 to 6 weeks before the date just to get a date lined up for something. And that was hard. That was very lonely times in my life.
Well, how did you come to overcome that? Just through your faith growth and acceptance?
Yeah, and the friends that I began to put around me, the male guys that I began to put around me, and the Christian community that I got involved with in my late teens began to put a good network of friends around me that when they saw me starting to get down, they were there to pick me up and support me.
Now, you said when you were wee little, the neighborhood children didn't see you as different.
Right.
You were just Larry.
Right.
And as you got older, you started to see that people treated you differently?
Not treating me differently, but I began to recognize that, yeah, I am disabled, yeah, I am different, yeah, there was something different about me. And I kept a lot of it inside me. I didn't really share it with a lot of people because I was so driven to succeed. I really wanted to show a lot of people, except this close-knit circle of friends, what was really going on inside. And the outside, it appeared that I was a very happy-go-lucky young man, but on the inside, there was a lot of anger and turmoil and frustration.
When did you come to reconcile that?
It wasn't until 1984. I was on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, taking a boat ride from the Sea of Tiberias to the city of Capernaum. And it was a Sunday morning, and I started to reflect about how many miracles Jesus did in Capernaum. He did more miracles in that one city than any other city on the face of the earth. And I started to think, I'm going to stop here on the seashore where he called the disciples and pray to be healed and pray for physical healing. And I was with a dear friend that day by the name of Josh McDowell. And I asked Josh that morning if he would stop and pray for physical healing. And I had it in the back of my mind, I thought, won't that be neat? What a story, what a testimony. Young man goes to the jail, physically healed. I thought, well, I'm going to start with the 700 Club and just hit the circuit. Well, God answered that prayer that day in a very unique way. And if Josh was here today, Josh would tell you the same thing. Up to that point in my life, I liked Larry Patton, but I did not love Larry Patton. And there's a big difference between the word like and the word love. And God just began to show me that day how special I was to him. And, basically because I was creating the image of God, that I was purchased at a great price, and that I was very unique. And each one of us is special for those three reasons. And you opened up with that scripture, about the potter. God just showed me that day that I was a pot formed in his hands, and that he was going to begin to use my life in a very unique way. And he put in my heart that day that if he would physically heal me, I would speak for him for 6 months, maybe a year, but then we'd get on with my life and would start to take it for granted. But being that he healed me from the inside out, I tell people that I began speaking that week about him and about his love and about his grace. And that was 14 years ago. And he said, Larry, you'll speak for me as long as you're on earth. And my whole being now of living on this earth is to share his good news with others and to share how I've overcome these obstacles because of him.
You said earlier that you, your weakness is visible.
Right.
Your brokenness is visible.
Right.
But we all have brokenness that
Right.
most just can't see.
Right.
Do you, when you do your speaking, your public speaking, when you go to the high schools or speak to men's
Churches,
groups and churches, is that the main focus?
That's the main focus, is that we're all handicapped in some way. And I tell kids, especially kids now, that I'm luckier than they are. Because I have to wake up every morning and face it face to face in the mirror. Where with your weakness, with your disability, with your handicap, you might be able to tuck it away for a couple weeks, couple months, couple years. But until you bring it out in the light of Christ and deal with it and accept it, it's still there.
And it will eventually overcome you.
Right.
I want to stop for a minute and reintroduce you to any of our viewers that have just tuned in. You are watching Lumen Christi. With us today we have Larry Patton, a wonderful disciple for the Lord. I think it most ironic that the Lord would lead you into a speaking ministry when at a very early age doctors told your mother that you would never speak.
Well, when I was about 4 years old, I was diagnosed at the age of 2 with CP. And between the age of 2 and 4, my mom and dad and I were at the doctor. And I would have 6 months checkup with the orthopedic specialist. And at that time, I wasn't speaking yet. And the doctor looked me right in the eye and said, "What's your name?" And my mother said, "It's Larry." Well, this doctor just threw my mother out, up and down, and just said, "Don't ever do that again. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to your son." And mother was a very emotional person, so mom took it really hard. But mom learned a very valuable lesson that day, because she learned that if she started speaking for me that day, she would be speaking for me for the rest of my life.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That had to be hard for her. That would probably be similar to the swords that they talked about for Blessed Mother.
Because she didn't know any different. She didn't have any other kids. I was the oldest of my brother and I, so she had nothing to go on based on history. She was learning this as she went along, and so it was very difficult for her.
Now, one of your mother and father's best friends, just throughout the time of befriending your family, began chronicling interesting events in your life and milestones in your life, and eventually she comes to write this book about you.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, the book is basically starting from birth. See, it was a miracle that I even lived. I was born in Madison, Indiana. One doctor, one nurse on staff that night. There was complications. I didn't start breathing for 25 minutes. And my mother sat there and prayed through the whole delivery that I would live. And so the book starts that day and goes up until I was standing at the airport, at Metro Airport, waiting to take a flight out to California for my first assignment with IBM. So it really starts and kind of goes through my life history. But it's also a unique book, because the one thing you don't do is you don't read a book from 3 points of view. And this book is written from 3 points of view. It's the author's point of view looking into our family. It's my mother's point of view as a mother raising a handicapped son. And then as I get older, it's my point of view as I deal with this disability and growing up with Christ.
So this would be a great tool for any young mother
Oh, yeah.
who's struggling.
That's why we wrote it, because when we were doing the research for the book, we went back to the school where I went in those early years. And we found of the 15 kids that were in the program at that time, 13 of the parents were divorced. And I think it's so easy today to leave our marriages and just flee. And mom and dad never thought about that. It never entered their mind. It was like, okay, we have this disabled son. How are we going to get through this together?
So let's talk about your marriage. How long have you been married?
10 years.
And this was something that obviously drew your parents closer together in their marriage. But how is it in your marriage?
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, my wife is the answer to many prayers. My mom started praying back when I was a teenager, that my brother and I would meet Christian women, and she prayed diligently for that. And I met Jenny when I was about 30 in a young adult single group, Christian group. But what was unique about that was I thought if I had gotten married, I would achieve the ultimate success. Mm-hmm. And so I was all through my 20s just longing to get married. And it wasn't until I had this experience on the Sea of Galilee, and it wasn't until Christ showed me that I didn't need a wife. That was one area in my life that I didn't want to give over to the Lord. Because if the Lord called me to be single, I couldn't accept that. Well, God wanted me to accept that, and God wanted me to accept myself for who I was. And when I met my wife, I wasn't interested in dating. She wasn't interested in dating. And I think a lot of the masks were down because we both knew that we weren't going to get married. I had come to that understanding, and so had she. And 6 months later, we were engaged.
How old were you?
31.
So how long had you been working at IBM?
I had been there about 8 to 9 years.
And
when I met Jenny.
And you weren't even out there looking. You finally submitted that part of your life.
And just said, okay, well, and when I met Jenny, I was dating 4 or 5 different women and just having fun and just wasn't going to get married.
Let's talk about some of your hobbies. I understand that you drive.
Yes.
You like to ski.
Yes.
Was it bowl or football?
What?
What was the
bowling? Bowl and golf.
And are you pretty good at all these things?
I think so, and I just spent the last weekend up in northern Michigan skiing, and had a delightful time, and took my son out for the first time. And my wife does not ski, but my son does, and that's something that we can do together. So.
What would you say to somebody that's locked into this mindset that simply because they're disabled physically in one area, that they don't let it consume their whole life?
Well, I think I was unique because I had parents. My dad was a phys ed teacher for 35 years. And so I grew up, in athletics. And my dad and mom always had the philosophy of, Larry, at least try it. And if you can't do it, then we'll find another way to do it. When I started skiing 10 years ago, Mom thought I was pushing the envelope a little bit too fast. But the thing about skiing is it's the only sport or it's the only activity that I have found that I'm totally free of my disabilities. And it's so hard to describe that. But as I'm coming down a mountainside on skis, the disability doesn't come into play.
It's amazing.
And I feel, God's right there next to me, and I just feel totally free. It's hard to describe it if you've never been disabled.
Let's talk about your new church.
Okay.
Now, you were resistant about going to Faith Lutheran.
Well, yes, not because of faith, because several families, and I won't go into the reasons why, had decided that it was time to leave where we were. I had been there 40 years. So it was a big decision to leave our church.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife and I decided that we would start church shopping, for lack of a better word, and just see where God wanted us to minister next. And we thought we were looking for a small, intimate church.
Mm-hmm.
And we visited probably 6 to 8 churches. And a lot of our friends had gone out to Faith Lutheran in Troy. And I was very resistant because I didn't want to be a follower. I'm always a leader, so I didn't want to say, oh, there goes the Pattons. They're going with everybody else. And after we had tried these 6 or 7 other churches, my wife said, okay, let's go try Faith. And I was like, well, okay, if you insist. And we walked in that day, and it felt like we had gone home. I mean, I can't describe the peace. And here we thought we were looking for a small, intimate church. There are 4,000 members at Faith.
But there is that intimate
Yes.
feeling.
And I must also say that our son, who will be 7 next month, is adopted and is pure Filipino. So we were looking for a church family that was a little bit more diversified.
Mm-hmm.
And in the smaller churches, it was difficult to find that.
So you found the perfect place.
Yeah, and
And
so
that's-
far.
That's a wonderful church. They're
Yeah.
very innovative in their approach. We've had several of the people that they've had minister at their church come on the program, so we're real grateful. One of the girls that used to work with us is a member at Faith Lutheran, so that's a fabulous place.
And they've been very supportive of my ministry, very supportive of, encouraging me and just very supportive.
Your ministry, Hurdling Handicaps, you're available to speak at.
Churches, colleges, high schools. I do a lot of work with Campus Crusade for Christ. They go into college campuses. Basically, I would say the youngest crowd I ever talked to was a group of kindergartners. And I don't know what the oldest crowd was. I've done the Lions Chapel program. I've done the Tigers Chapel program. I'm very involved here in the state of Michigan in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So I do a lot of collegiate football chapel programs. So basically, wherever God opens up the door for me to speak, I walk through it.
And they've put the number up across the screen, so if anybody's interested in contacting you for a speaking engagement, or if they would like to help your ministry in
Right.
some capacity,
Just
or
call our office.
and if they would like to get the book through the mail, they can contact you that way. Otherwise, at the end of the program, our sponsor at the end of the credit roll will be carrying this book for you
Great.
at both of her locations.
Great.
I wanted to read something that was written in your bio. It said, in the last 5 years, I've actually told God, if you can use me more being handicapped than not, if I can win more people for you, so be it. So you came to a place where you realized he could use you in a greater capacity in your weakness.
Right.
And-
And his glory shines brighter through our weaknesses and our strengths.
What would you say to a small child who's struggling with, who's old enough to understand a motivational message? What would you say to them during those hard times where they might feel a little bit chastised for their uniqueness?
I would say that they're a child of God, that they're special, and we talked about why I was special, and that they're special for the same reasons, and that God did not want them to be disabled. It's just because of the fallenness and the sin in this world that we're disabled. And I take great pleasure in knowing that someday, when I get to heaven, when I see Jesus face to face, I will be totally healthy. I will have a totally healthy body. And, we think of a year, we think of 5 years. Well, our lives on this earth is very small compared to eternity. So I know when I meet you someday in heaven, that we're going to have totally healthy bodies. And I can't wait for that.
It's going to be awesome. Something to work for.
And also, I'm looking forward to it even more now because something that we haven't talked about that was a big struggle is, and I think we're seeing it more and more in our population. Our population is getting older, and therefore our population disabilities are starting to grow. I never dreamed that I would be a caretaker for my mother. My mother, the last 3 years of her life came down with Parkinson's and was confined to a wheelchair. And here, all of a sudden, the roles were reversed. I was having to take care of her, where she had taken care of me for all those years. And last year, she went home to be with Jesus, and I look forward to the day of seeing her again.
You said that you don't even like the terminology of disabled or victim. What are some more positive terminology?
Well, what we like to do, and I'm very active in the disability community, is to remember that we're people first, and then adjective second. So instead of saying the disabled, I'm a person with a disability, or I'm a person with cerebral palsy, as opposed to a victim of CP or something like that.
Our time went so fast, didn't it?
It's over?
Yes.
Oh.
We'll have to have you come back and
love
talk about
to.
some of your aspirations for helping reach the church body,
Okay.
prepare their congregations to understand disabilities greater,
Great.
and your ministry. Thank you so much for coming. God bless you.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to simply, before we even say the closing statement, I would like to mention that I talked with a pastor from Lakeside Community Church today, and they will be having a contemporary Christian artist, his name is Michael O'Brien, as a performance artist on April 4th at 7 o'clock. The tickets are $7. The church is located at 33701 Jefferson. It's a half mile north of Masonic in St. Clair. This young man had a tremendous conversion experience in Medjugorje, I guess, in the last, quite recently. And he shares that in his music. So we invite you all to enjoy that at Lakeside Community Church. The pastor's name there is Ken Render. He's a tremendous man of God. In closing, Philippians 4, verses 12 through 13, Paul tells us, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, when well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. This is my all-time favorite scripture. In the entire Bible, there is nothing that with Jesus Christ's help we cannot overcome. Be it an addiction of any variety, any handicap, physical, emotional, or spiritual, no difficulties are too great. Nothing can hold us back from attaining all that Christ has created us to attain for his greater glory. So quit wasting time procrastinating and just drowning yourself in self-pity. Those things are wicked and they hold you back. Take authority over those weaknesses in Jesus Christ. And remember, as always, to let Christ's light shine through you.